Hello, glad to see you again. We're starting our next webinar, and the subject is about the Bible, science in the Bible. And so we'll start with a PowerPoint presentation as usual, and we'll get started right now. Science, Bible and science, how to resolve problems. What if the Bible was interpreted to say that the moon was made of green cheese? Now, of course, you'd have to accept that on faith because nobody's been to the moon until more recently. What happens if science proves otherwise? They bring rocks back that are not made of green cheese. So how do you cope with this? Is the Bible wrong in saying what it said? You have a number of options. For instance, at least you have three choices. One, you can ignore this information, just pretend like it's not true, or you can discredit it by saying it's not true, saying you don't believe they went to the moon. Or you can go back to the Bible and look and see if there's a way to harmonize this possible discrepancy. So in our illustration, we're going to be saying that the Hebrew word green that was interpreted or translated green in the Bible can mean light grayish green, like we see here. Okay, that's more in keeping with the actual color of the moon rocks. And the Hebrew word for cheese or curdled cheese can also mean rough, lumpy material. So you can see how verse can be translated. Instead of the moon is made of green cheese, you can say the moon is made of light gray green rough material, which would harmonize with what the findings were. So the conflict is not with the Bible. The conflict is with translators. And we find that often to be the case, that translators have a particular lens that they're viewing things through, and so they translate according to their background knowledge of the subject at hand. Genesis 2:4 is an example. For instance, these are the Genesis 2:4. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created in the day that the Lord God made earth and heaven. So we see that and we say, well, it took one day to make everything, even though it had already been divided up into 7 days. But look how the NIV translates that. This is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created, when the Lord God made the earth and heavens. They avoided the word day altogether. Why is that? Well, because there's a certain amount of controversy associated with the word day. And so instead of translating it accurately, they put their own gloss on it. They let their predisposition judge how they would translate it. For instance, when you look at the Strong's translation of this, you can see very clearly that it talks about day. And what does that mean? Literally means from sunrise to sunset, or from one sunset to the next, or figuratively, a space of time defined by an associated term, often used adverbially to represent an age, always, chronicles, continually. So you see the word day has a variety of meanings, and it's a translator's prerogative to see how to best translate this to match the sense that the Bible is trying to convey. We experience phenomenal language when dealing with the Bible, and we'll learn a little bit more about phenomenal language. We say sunrise. Well, we know that it's not sunrise, it's morning earth spin, right? That's what the actual, but the sun looks like it's rising in the east. And also sunset. Another example of phenomenal language. The sun sets in the west. Phenomenal language is describing things as they appear to the observer. And we'll find that the Bible is written from that perspective, especially in the older time periods, to just describe what was seen, either by a vision or whatever, or however it was experienced. So that's what we're going to be looking at now. For instance, there is no word for planet Earth in the Bible. The Bible only has, the Hebrew Bible, at least only has 8,000 words. And among those words, there's none for planet Earth because the early Hebrew writers didn't know that the Earth was a planet. And so naturally, they wouldn't have had that as a part of their vocabulary. Whole Earth, that's translated that way, meant what was known at the time. That was the whole Earth. There is no statement in the Bible that includes America directly, even though we can see, and we'll see how maybe it's implied indirectly. Romans 1:8. Paul was saying that the faith was spoken of throughout the whole world. And of course, he meant at that time the Roman world. Paul wasn't going through the whole world, but he was preaching, and the disciples were preaching in the known world at that time. Daniel 4:10. Thus were the visions of mine head in my bed. I saw, and behold, a tree in the midst of the earth, and the height thereof was great. What do you mean, in the midst of the earth? What does that mean? There's a picture of what we would possibly see that Daniel saw, but I doubt if he saw that, because that certainly is a planet. But how could you behold it from all over the earth? You couldn't behold it from the other side of the earth. But here's the vision that actually Daniel saw. These are the visions I saw while lying in my bed. I looked, and there before me stood a tree in the middle of the land. Its height was enormous. There's what Daniel saw, as we see on the right here. It wasn't like the planet, but it was a bowl-like configuration. Here's the Babylonian view of the earth. We see an ancient tablet there, and they have a picture which has been projected forward here. And the picture depicts the known world at that time. And it has rivers, and then the points on these stars represent islands. And that's where some might say that the earth, or that the United States is included, because it would be included amongst the isles of the sea beyond the tips of those stars. But of course, they didn't know what was beyond the tips of those stars because they had no access to that part of the earth at that time. This particular reference is taken from the Enuma Elish. They believed in a circular flat earth that was surrounded by water. Known and unknown islands located on the star tips, as we mentioned. Some have interpreted this could include America. That's why I said it could be America could be included in the Bible indirectly, but not directly. Daniel accepted the dream at face value. Apparently it made sense to him, and he wrote it down as he envisioned it. Here's a picture of the Hebrew worldview we'll talk about. And you'll notice during the creation account, it talks about waters above, heavenly expanse or arch, and the sun, moon, and stars are in the expanse. And then there's waters below the earth, as we show them here. The Bible's filled with phenomenal language. God sits above the arch circle of the earth, Isaiah 40:22. Some believe that this Isaiah 40:22 refers to a circular earth because it uses the term circle. But actually, it doesn't refer to a circular earth. It refers to the circle of heaven, where God's dwelling is, looking down on the inhabitants of the earth as if they were grasshoppers. Bible's description of heaven and earth. Genesis 7:11, the floodgates of the heavens. You'll notice when the account of Noah's flood is talked about, it mentions the fact that the floodgates of the heavens were open. And also, it mentions that the earth's spring or fountains were opened. And then in Job 26:11, it talks about the pillars of heaven. That these pillars are mountain tops that support the expanse that separates the earth from the waters above, because those waters drain through those floodgates of heaven when they're opened, and that's what causes rain. Otherwise, how would that water get up there? Job 9:6. God sends earthquakes and shakes the ground. He rocks the pillars that support the earth. You can see the pillars there are believed to be the means by which the earth is supported. Well, when did we change our view from that concept of a flat earth to what we believe now? Flat earthers never have changed. Of course, I don't know whether flat earthers are serious or not, but of course, you know the story that there are a group of people that talk about a flat earth at this time. The earth was known to be round from very early in human history. Aristotle deemed the earth as a globe as early as 330 BC. In 240 BC, Greek Eratosthenes computed the Earth's circumference within 16.3% error, clear back at 240 BC. In the 4th century AD, Augustine said that reason prevails when interpreting the Bible. And so we can't interpret everything literally because it's not always to be taken literally, especially when you're dealing with phenomenal language. Examples of Bible science conflict. Nicholas Copernicus, 1473 to 1543. He died at the age of 70. He proposed the theory that the sun was the center of the solar system. This was very controversial at that time, and it caused a lot of clamor. He dedicated the work of his book where he points this out to Pope Paul III. However, science of the day was Aristotelian, and Aristotle thought that the earth was the center of the universe, and these various like transparent glass circles, spheres around the earth, one of which carried the sun, others carried the planets, and one carried the moon, and then the fixed stars were beyond and way on the outer edges. So this was Aristotle's view, and that was a prevailing view of the day. Earth being the center of the solar system was always backed by the best science of the day, because that's what everybody accepted Aristotle as the final word on this information. And he had been so for 1,800 years, because this was 1543, and Aristotle, remember, was 330 BC. Additionally, an unauthorized preface to Copernicus' book by a theologian, Andreas Osiander, said that Copernicus didn't believe his own theory. Now, this wasn't true. Possibly the reason he said that was because it was a controversial theory, and so he didn't want to support it or present it as being truth. It was just a viewpoint of Copernicus that he really didn't believe himself. Next we have Galileo Galilei, 1564 to 1642. He died at the age of 77. I'm always interested to see how long these people lived. They lived about the same age as we live today, clear back then. But they had to really be healthy because they didn't have any means to treat diseases like we have today. I know myself personally, I would have probably died a long time ago if I wasn't able to go to the doctor and take something like penicillin or some other medication that helped me overcome some ailment that I might be experiencing. Einstein called Galileo the father of modern science. He disagreed with the Aristotelian model of science of the day. And that was a very challenging thing to do. Certainly it took a lot of courage to disagree with Aristotle on matters of science. Galileo's argumentative and impatience created many enemies, you might say, or people that he was just a brusque person and probably it wouldn't be easy to dislike him. The church called for a true physical demonstration that the sun does not circle the earth, that the earth circles the sun. Galileo correctly responded with ocean tides being caused by the sun as proof. Now, of course, that didn't go over very well, and besides, it's untrue to begin with. Some scriptures that were used against Galileo. Now, notice these. They are powerful scriptures that if you were to not understand how they're being used, you would really find them convincing. For instance, Psalm 93, 1, 96, 10, 104, 5, 1 Chronicles 16:30, the earth cannot be moved. Well, if the earth was traveling around the sun, it was definitely moving. So that was a powerful argument. Ecclesiastes 1:5 states that the sun rises and sets and returns to its place. Now, what does that sound like? It sounds like the sun's going around the earth to me, because it returns to its place. It does that at nighttime when you don't even know it's there. It's going around this earth and going back to its place in the morning when it arises again. Joshua 10:13, and the sun stood still and the moon stayed. We all remember the story of Joshua where the day was extended a full day to allow him to complete the battle he was fighting before nightfall came so he could completely be victorious. Galileo took Augustine's position on the scriptures, not to take every passage literally. The scriptures pertaining to the earth meant that the earth remained in God's assigned place for it. Not necessarily that it was literally not moving. It's just that God put it in a position and it stayed in that position, even though it was moving at the time. He personally defended his former friend Pope Urban VIII. Galileo wrote a book about the Copernican theory, and he approached the Pope, who was his personal friend, and asked him if it would be all right to write that book. And so the Inquisition of the day and the Pope said yes. But he said, don't write it as a known fact, just write it as a theory, give pro and con. And then he said, also incorporate my view. And he gave his view to Galileo. Well, Galileo completely ignored most of the instructions, but he did incorporate the Pope's idea in the conversation. He made it a dialogue between his hero and this character, Simplicio. And he just tore to shreds the arguments of Simplicio. Well, of course, Simplicio was taking the arguments of the Pope. And so Pope Urban made this request, and Galileo stupidly humiliated him. And this is what caused the problems that Galileo had with the Catholic Church, primarily. At that time, the Reformation was just growing, and the Pope was in a very dangerous position, and so he had to act against Galileo, as the Church did. Politics and brashness against Galileo. The Church later recanted and supported the heliocentric position, and in 1992 publicly apologized. Took him a while to do it, I'd say. Now, this is an interesting debate. Bill Nye and Ken Ham debate. Bill Nye is the science guy. That's what they called him. Ken Ham, Answers in Genesis, and the CEO of Answers in Genesis. And he is a young Earth creationist. He believes the Earth is only about 10,000 years old at the most. So this debate was held in Kentucky on February 4th, 2014. Bill Nye brought up issues, many of the issues that we've already reviewed. And Ken Ham just completely ignored them and witnessed about Jesus. Didn't answer any of the questions. Ken Ham stressed major science differences. For instance, he showed how the Bible teaches that only thousands of years have passed since the creation of the earth, whereas the science says billions of years have passed. And of course, that was absolutely not uh, in Ken Ham's position, was not compatible with the Bible. So Ken Ham did not believe in historical science. He believed in experimental science. That means anything you experiment with today, he would take, but anything you talk about the past, that's not experimental. That's all supposition. Experimental or observational science was okay. But origins or historical science, he disagrees with the validity of that approach to determining truth. Is historical science true? Old Earth agrees with geologic history. Young Earth says geologic history was made by Noah's flood. Examine continental drift. That's what we'll do. We'll examine continental drift. We kind of have a preview of it here on these two pictures of the globe. And we can examine the fossil record to see which is convincing as far as the history of the Earth is concerned. Let's see where this takes us. Old Earth and young Earth agree continental drift has taken place. Here you see 4 pictures. It goes 200 million years ago. And you notice Pangaea. Pangaea is almost all this landmass at that time is called Pangaea. And then you see in 130 million years ago, it began to break up. 65 million years ago, about the age of the dinosaurs, and when they demised, it was looking much like it does today, and here are the present. And you can see that how South America and Africa fit together. And all these various continents that we have today all fitted together just like the original Pangaea. And so both the old Earth and young Earth agree that continental drift has taken place. However, young Earthers believe that Pangaea existed when Adam was created about 4,000 years ago. Here you have 4,000 years when Adam was created, you have Pangaea, and you have to get from there to here in 4,000 years. Well, we're going to review how they think that happened. For me, it's fantastic to even think of such a thing, but of course, many people do, and I can't fault them. And if God wanted to do things that way, he certainly could. But it's very difficult to prove anything scientifically that that's the way things happen. Hydroplate hypothesis by Walt Brown, PhD. He explains everything based more on faith than on the evidence. Interior water situated under 10 miles of rock caused Noah's flood, not rain. And we do find in the Bible that it does say that the waters began to rise before it started raining. Water pressure cut upper rock and traveled at 3 miles per second, shaping the continents. That's when all the continents broke up into the present shapes that we have now by this massive water pressure that cut through rock at that rate of speed. It released pressurized water that shot up 20 miles into the atmosphere, and it all fell as sheets of ice, and this is what caused the ice caps to develop. Mud extrudes from the crack, forming the fossil record. And so this is where all the layers of earth came from, through this extrusion of mud from this crack made into the earth. Mantle material bulges into the crack, causing oceanic spreading centers to rise. We do have evidence of oceanic spreading centers. We have the centers, we have them mapped out, and this is according to that theory how this works. and the continent slid along the uplifted mantle at 45 miles per hour. Can you imagine the continent of the United States, craton of the United States, moving at 45 miles an hour? Moving continental material collides at current positions, forming mountains and troughs and trenches. This all takes place in 1 year. If this hypothesis is correct, ocean deposits should all be the same depth. Actually, continents float on the mantle material like giant icebergs. You see here the plate of South America, the continent of South America, and it's floating on the mantle material, and the ocean material is subducting or going underneath it because it can't climb over it. The gravity pulls it underneath, and this causes huge depths of the ocean. These trenches along the borderlines of country or continents produce huge, deep trenches, deeper than any other part of the ocean. And the Andes Mountains, or a mountain chain, always forms in a subduction zone like this. We have that in the United States too, with and volcanoes up north, Mount Shasta and so forth, all formed by subduction underneath the American or the North American craton. Ocean crust material is analytically older at the trench line, unlike the hydroplate hypothesis. Remember, the hydroplate would all be the same age, but when they test these materials close to the trenches, it's older and it's much thicker at the trench location because it's been traveling from the zone clear from the center of the ocean to this point, and they estimate the time it took to get here is 200 million years. And so as a result, the deposition rate would be much thicker here, and it would be practically nothing at the mid-Atlantic spreading center. This diagram is verified by borings and numerous tests, such as magnetic anomalies. New interesting facts about geotectonics. Continents move like fingernails grow. The Pacific plate moves about 3.2 inches per year. I think that's more than my fingernails grow, but maybe not. I've never measured the annual growth of my fingernails, though 3.2 inches per year is necessarily slow. We don't notice it when we're living on the Pacific plate. Nevertheless, it's still moving. Seismic activities abound beyond the plate boundaries. Geomagnetic anomalies. When rock cools, it locks in magnetic pole direction. And we notice in this drawing, you have magnetic north on the left, and then when it reverses, magnetic south is actually the North Pole, just the opposite of what we see today. This is very unusual. It's unusual to us because we've never seen it happen. But throughout geologic history, it happens quite frequently. And the evidence of that happening is locked into the rock molecules that orient themselves on the prevailing magnetic direction. Earth history of past magnetic reversals. Here's what we see, a diagram trying to show how we have what we call magnetic reversals. You notice the dark colors are normal polarity, meaning that they show north. And in the very center is a spreading center. And so the current magnetic direction for the North Pole is our north, what we call true north. The white areas are reversed magnetic polarity. And so, and then of course the dotted line is the mid-Atlantic ridge that is expanding. In other words, it's moving outward as new rock extrudes into that location, you then see that there's a duplicate of stripes going both to the right and to the left because they are all existing at the same time and they experience the same reversal pattern. Calculations agree with observed evidence. You notice up in the red, it says calculated magnetic profiles assuming seafloor spreading. Mathematically, they have determined how to trace the actual magnetic changes. And then you have the observed magnetic profile from oceanographic surveys. So that matches very closely to what we see in the calculated region. So we know that these particular features are actually present in Earth's history. The last magnetic reversal was about 780,000 years ago. And you can notice on the drawing, those areas, those white areas just to the right and left of the spreading center would be probably that interval of change. Hydroplate hypothesis predicts no reversals. The young Earth view about how all of these layers were formed, it occurred in such a short period of time, there would be no reversals because there are no reversals in the last 780,000 years. Where are the intermediate fossils? That's another question that is raised by the young Earth creationists looking at the fossil record. Old Earth say God modified toolkit genes progressively. Each genome has as what can be described as toolkit genes, and they are easily modified with only slight modifications will change them considerably. And God, of course, knows just exactly what changes to make. And so from going from A to C on our diagram, God tinkers with the genome in species 1 and produces species 2 within one generation. Now, of course, evolutionists finding that it is true that there are rather abrupt changes, although this line is not vertical, it's slanted where it says transition. Now, there should be intermediate characters in that transition line, but it occurs very quickly, geologically speaking, and it's because of small isolated populations all of a sudden being driven by environmental changes that produces species 2 through a series of good mutations that occur within the species 1 that changes it environmentally to species 2 so it's better adapted. Now, of course, young Earth creationists say everything was created at the same time. So you don't have any transition. All the species 1, species 2, species X, were all created at the same time. Young Earth creationists say no way to check fossil dating methods. Of course, they're incorrect in this because we have ways of determining the dates of volcanic eruptions. And when they sandwich, as you see here, certain fossils, they become synonymous with that time period. And we notice that time period is valid over the whole Earth. And so there is a way to check dating methods with regard to fossils. Every animal that has ever lived had to be alive in Noah's day, according to the young Earth creationists. So what does that entail? It is estimated that over 5 billion species have existed, with only 1% living today. 99% of all the species that have ever lived on the Earth have gone extinct. But according to the young Earth hypothesis, they all lived together, and when they went extinct, they all went extinct at the same time. Today, the number of species range from 10 to 14 million, with only 1.2 million actually known. That's how we stand today. There are so many species yet to be discovered. We don't even know about them. Look at those numbers, 10 to 14, 1.2. Seems like it's less than 10% of the species on Earth are actually known today. No such thing as unique index fossils, which are only found in the same stratas worldwide. This is what young Earth creationists say. There's no such thing as index fossils. However, we find the evidence, physical evidence shows that index fossils are throughout the Earth in the relatively same places. And when we say index fossil, that means it's a unique fossil for just that period. As you see here in the lower picture, there's trilobites. And then as you see there's a clam-like creature. And they're separated by many, many years. And so it goes from 520 million years ago to 510 million years ago. This has been substantiated by dating the actual layers that sandwich these fossils. The fossil record was established by the flood, by animals escaping from rising waters. This is, of course, the young Earth view. In order to differentiate all the different fossils, they start saying that as the waters rose in Noah's day, the animals ran to higher ground. And in the process, they died out in a kind of a systematic layer, small animals to big animals. Young Earthers say scientists are forced to agree with current evolutionary assumptions despite the evidence. In other words, young Earth creationists say the evidence shows a young Earth, but scientists, for fear of their jobs, are forced to agree, and for that reason, they write agreement papers. No death before Adam, so no extinctions possible. The young Earth creationists do not believe that any death occurred before Adam and Eve sinned, and so of course there could be no extinction of animals. Romans 8, 19, and 20, the NIV. The creation awaits in eager expectation for the sons of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it in hope. Young Earth creationists will say that this includes all of the creation, the plants, the animals, everything that has ever existed on the earth that we could say is alive is included within this criteria. So no death before Adam, no extinctions possible. Romans 8:20 says, for the creature was made subject to vanity, not willingly, but by reason of him who hath subjected the same in hope. This is a King James version of verse 20 of Romans 8. But what about the word choice? Doesn't that imply intelligence? Absolutely. Animals and plants can't make a choice. Only humans who have the rational fortitude to be able to make a choice with regard to the conditions they experienced. Scriptures refer to intelligent creatures that Christ came to save. He didn't come to save animals. He didn't come to save plants. He came to save humans. Romans 5:14. Nevertheless, death reigned from the time of Adam to the time of Moses, even over those who did not sin by breaking a command, as did Adam, who was a pattern of the one to come. Who was the one to come? That was, of course, Jesus. Death not caused by Adam's sin. Death is caused by every individual who sins. Therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin, and in this way death came to all men because all sinned. Only Jesus did not sin and would not die naturally. Let's look at some comparisons. Bible, from the very beginning, we discussed this, and we'll see what differences there are between young Earth creationism and old Earth creationism. First of all, the young Earth creationists say that the Bible's translations are inerrant. And that would be one reason why Jimmy Falwell would hold up the King James Version of the Bible and say, I believe every word in this Bible is inspired directly from God. But it was a translation by a group of men in, I think, the 16th century. But Old Earth creationism says biblical inerrancy only applies to the original autographs. In other words, the original writings of the particular writers were inerrant at that time. We have no copies of those original documents. We have only copies made by copyists and translators. And so we're not sure whether they are absolutely inerrant, although in the main, they certainly do speak in agreement. There are certain changes or certain differences in the current text as opposed to the original text. For instance, according to young Earth creationists, the Earth was the center of the universe for 4 24-hour days. Remember, we talked about the dispute between whether the Earth was the center of the universe or whether the sun was the center of the universe. Young Earth creationists say the Earth was the center of the universe for a period of time. Of course, the Old Earth creationists say that Earth was never the center of the universe. All the celestial mechanics involved in Earth's positioning itself around the sun have always been in application, and it was never the center of the universe. Experimental science is agreed to, but not historical science. You know the difference between the two. Experimental science is what you can do today. Historical science is what people derive through archaeology and experimentation that involves past time. Old Earth creationism, however, believes both in experimental and historical science. Index fossils do not exist, according to the young Earth creationists. Index fossils are an accurate tool because we notice that index fossils occur worldwide in certain stratas, certain types of materials of differing ages. And so therefore we can identify them worldwide and correlate them with the process of creating those layers as time passed. Fossil record formed by fleeing animals. We mentioned that moments ago, but fleeing animals did not cause the differences that we see. Fossil record was formed naturally over time. There are two sources there that you can look at. There's an Earth creationist source on the left, and of course there's a creationist source, an Old Earth creationist source on the right. Well, thank you very much. I certainly enjoyed talking with you during this presentation, and I hope you'll join me again next week at the same time, same station.